Hey there, good morning. I'm Mike. I'm one of the pastors here. And we have been in this series called Gathering, where we spent the last couple weeks talking about gathering. The first week we talked about the importance of telling your story, going out there and inviting other people to gather with you, inviting people to find that same freedom that you have found. And last week we talked about why we gather and the importance your piece of the puzzle plays in gathering. As a matter of fact, we had an analogy of a puzzle last week where we said you are one piece of that puzzle, and it takes all of those pieces to make something beautiful. That just that one piece doesn't do us much good. It's rather insignificant. So I told you how much I hated doing puzzles, and guess what I did with that puzzle? I promptly gave it away as soon as the experience was over. And actually I got this picture this week. So Lily actually put that puzzle together for me, and it did make a beautiful picture. That to me, this dog is representing our church now, okay? This is us, all together in one piece. But it was exciting to get to see that picture. I really enjoyed that this week, and I looked at it, and I actually did have that thought in my head at you know what? What's so neat is that this puzzle is a piece of us. You know, we're all individual pieces, and we all make up a part of this. And so today we're going to talk about, I wanted to talk about a couple of things. First of all, I didn't want to wrap up the series without talking about who we gather for. So we're going to talk about that some, and then we're also going to talk about how we're going to continue to gather. How are we going to continue to gather whenever it seems like it's so difficult to do so often? But before we start off, I want to tell you guys a story. I used to canoe quite a bit when I was a kid. I've canoed most of my life. My dad actually had a canoe, or we owned a canoe when I grew up. My dad and I used to go a lot. My mom would drop us off at one end of the river. We'd canoe down. She'd go to the other end, take my little brother and sister. They'd play on the playground down there. And by the time we get down there, they'd pick us up and we'd go home. So we did that a lot. My best friend and I, we used to love going canoeing too whenever we were just like right out of school, probably, my first year out, didn't have much to do. In the summer, we'd just wake up one morning, we'd say, hey, let's go canoeing. We'd go on a little 2-mile, 4-mile float. Sometimes we'd go on a bigger, longer 8-mile float, whatever. But we loved doing that. So a couple years ago, my family and I were in Colorado, and we had an opportunity to go whitewater rafting. And I thought, well, this is easy. I've done this my whole life. I mean, I've been on a canoe on Shoal Creek 100 times. Well, whitewater rafting is not exactly canoeing. It's quite a bit different, actually. I thought it would be fine, and we signed the whole family up, and we all went to go get our instructions before they put us in, and the guy started telling us these stories about never disobey what the lead guy says, what your leader says. Always do what he says. And never fall backwards, always fall forward. And never, when your kid falls into the water, go after your kid. And start telling us stories like, if I had $1 for every dad that went after their kid that fell out of a boat, well, I could retire by. And he's telling me these stories, and I'm like, what have I got my family into? And I'm thinking, my kid is going to fall out of the boat into the water and die. So I'm really rethinking this process of what we're going to do, and if this was a good idea or not, because it really made it seem pretty scary is what was going to happen. But we get in the boat, and we get out there, and what was really super interesting about it, though, is you had that guide with you. As a matter of fact, I got a picture of us up here, of us rafting. This guy in the back, somebody actually asked me, they're like, who is that dude in the back? And I was like, that is the guy that kept me alive. But the guy in the back's our lead, and then this is the rest of us. And what's really interesting about this is there's a certain process and science to this. Like he'll tell you, paddle 3 times on the right side, and you do that, and you think, this is crazy. We don't know where we're going. I'm going right into that rock. And then you hit the currents, and it just takes you right back into the middle. Because there's this thing out there called the currents and the rapids. And these things will take you all kinds of places that you don't plan on going. And these currents and these rapids will lead you in directions that you didn't want to be at, like into the rocks, or into the trees and the sticks on the side of the shore with the spiders, So if you get caught in these currents, if you get caught in this place that you didn't plan on being, you're going to end up someplace where you didn't want to be. And I can say that the rafting and life are a lot the same in that sense, because there's currents and there's rapids in our life that we'll get caught up in. And we had a path and an idea of a direction of what way we were going to go. And we get caught in that path, and it takes us somewhere that we never intended on being. And all of a sudden, you were going okay, and you're in the rocks. All of a sudden you're going okay, and now you're in the trees with the spiders and the spider webs all over. I'm scaring Perry right now just thinking about that. But, you have this idea and this direction that you're wanting to go, and then all of a sudden you end up someplace you never intended on being because the currents and the rapids of life catch up to you. So as we talk about gathering, and we talk about how are we not going to forget to gather, I did want to talk about real quick, first, who we gather for. The reason we gather and who we gather for. There's 3 different groups of people that I would say that we gather for. The first one would be the lost. We gather for those people, and this is the second most important reason that I truly believe that we gather. We gather for those people that don't know Jesus. We gather for those people that haven't heard the same freedom and found the same freedom that we have found. This church is specifically designed to be a comfortable, welcoming experience where you're quickly known and quickly needed because you have an important piece in that puzzle that we have. And so we want to make this a place where somebody who doesn't know Jesus, doesn't know about Jesus, doesn't follow Jesus can feel welcome and comfortable. And like I said, that is the second most important reason that we are here. Another reason why we gather is we gather for each other. Now, I've kind of played this down through this series because sometimes I think that's what church becomes, is it becomes us gathering for each other, when that is the least significant reason for it, but also a very, very important reason for it. We gather so we can encourage each other, so we can bring each other along, so we can do life together. But sometimes that's what it becomes about. It just becomes a little social club of us gathering with our buddies and our friends week after week, and that's not what we want to be. We want to be a place that's here for lost people. We want to be here for each other also. But the most important reason that we gather is we gather for God. We gather so that we can worship God. I think worshiping is one of the greatest tools that we have in our arsenal, one of the greatest things that we have. That's why we get up here each week and we sing 2 or 3 songs at the beginning of the service. I'm not saying that every church experience will be like that, but we find that it gives that opportunity for us to worship God, to thank Him for everything that He's done, to welcome His Spirit into this place, to set not only a mood and a tone, but a feeling in your heart. Feeling in your heart for remembering what Jesus did for us. And sending those praises and clapping and raising your hands and singing. This is a place where you are welcome to worship as you see fit, as we worship God, because that's one of the things that I think is the most exciting thing to do, is to be able to worship. So we gather here not just for each other and the lost, but the main reason that we gather here each week is for God. Because when we gather and we worship God, funny thing happens is when we gather, things get a whole lot better. Things in our life begin to get a whole lot better. And I like the saying that Jesus is with us all the time, but great things happen when we gather. Jesus is with you all the time. It's not that He's not with you when you're not with other people, but when we gather together as a group, great things happen as we do life together. But all too often, things get in the way. We've got currents in life which take us another direction, and then we didn't even plan on it. All of a sudden, we're not gathering. We're not going to small groups. We're not showing up on Sunday because these currents happen and they drift us a different direction. So what I want to look at really is, how are we going to allow this to not happen? How are we going to continue to gather? How are we not going to let the things that are in life get in our way? Because it's easy to get up here and say, okay, Jesus is the lead pastor of this church and the Holy Spirit is in here and I'm going to show up here every week and I'm going to be here and I'm going to commit my life. And then next Sunday something comes up and then we don't actually act out or live out those things that we plan on doing. We live in a world that tells us all the time that you matter most, that your time is the most important. If it's inconvenient for you to gather with other people, that's okay. In fact, in the last 20 years, there are more people right now than there were 20 years ago that say they are Christians and have a church. But there are less people showing up to church on Sunday morning than there were 20 years ago. So what does that tell us? It tells us that these currents and these rapids have gotten into people's lives and drifted them away to another place. And they're not gathering. And it's not just external things that keep us from gathering, but we have internal currents as well that keep us from gathering. I would say that the sinful part of me, the part that I see or feel most often is that I fight my own issues with not wanting to gather, with wanting to be lazy or easy or stay home by myself, because that's the easiest thing to do, is to not gather. It is much easier, I promise you, it is much easier to not gather than it is to gather. Wouldn't it be better to be sleeping in on Sunday morning than to coming in here? Wouldn't it be better to go home after work and not go do small group than it would be going home and getting kids ready and coming home? But I can also tell you this, from doing that, from being in that place a lot of times where I can't remember, how many times, probably almost all of them, that we were going to gather, that we were going to go do something, that I wouldn't come home and say, I really don't want to go do this tonight. I really don't want to go, get everybody together or go out there, have everybody come over to the house. But I can also remember every single time that we've gathered, at the end of it, I've said, man, I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I hung out with those people. I'm so glad I went to dinner with those people. I'm so glad I went to these people's house or whatever, because there's something about gathering that makes everything great as we do that. So if we want to see all the things that God has offered for our life, we're going to have to push ourselves to gather. And we're going to have to push ourselves to fight those currents. We're going to push ourselves to fight away. And we saw that with the early churches. We talked about them last week in Acts chapter 2. We talked about how they continued to gather and they continued to eat and they met regularly. And as we continue on and look at that church as it kept going, it says that they devoted themselves to meeting regularly. As we look in Acts chapter 20, verse 7, it says, the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. Paul was preaching, and since he was leaving the next day, he kept talking until midnight. I thought since that was one of the scriptures for today, maybe I should talk until midnight. No, I'm just kidding. I couldn't make it till midnight. I'll be lucky to make it 35 minutes today. Like I said, I got this weird, I'm hitting puberty thing going on, so if my voice cracks, y'all are allowed to make fun of me. It's fine. Anyway, they dedicated themselves to coming together. They dedicated themselves to hear those teachings of Paul, because they knew that God was with them now like never before. And in that part from chapter 2 to chapter 20, we see the Holy Spirit come. And now the Holy Spirit's coming as we gather together. And so many other great things are happening. I know there's currents in life and things that we struggle with and things that keep us from gathering all the time. That's what we're really going to look at today, is how can we fight against those trends? How can we fight against that current? How can we fight those rapids and keep going the direction that we want to go? As we continue to live in a world that gets busier and busier, you've probably seen the benefit at some point in your life that that when we gather and when we get together, that things are better. But then it doesn't actually happen on purpose. But what happens is there may just be 1 week. And you're like, you know what? It's really nice out today and I really got to get yard work done. And it's going to rain all the rest of the week and I don't have another day to do it. And so then you miss this week. And you're like, I can just watch it online. It's okay. And then after you watch it online that week, the next week rolls around and you're like, well, nobody really called me anyway, so they didn't really kind of miss me. So it's cool if I go ahead and just, slide out the next week. And before you know it, it's been a month since you've gathered. You've stopped going to small groups. You've stopped going to experiences. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we continue to gather? And I know that's the question you all are asking yourselves right now. I appreciate you asking me that, because that works very well for me, because that's what I've prepared today's message about, is how do we continue to gather? So we're going to look at the book of Hebrews, chapter 24 and 25. And this is the verses that we've based most of this series off of. And to give you a little bit of previous context into the Bible, right before Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 through 25 is Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 through 23. And I didn't have to do a lot of big, heavy research to figure that out. It's just simple counting. That was a joke. Y'all can laugh in church, okay? I didn't say it was a good joke, but you can laugh at my joke. No, in all seriousness, Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 through 23 is a beautiful story about how God is here because he loves us. He's not a God of condemnation. He's not a God that's sitting on a cloud with a lightning bolt just waiting for you to screw up and throw it down at you. It's about God sending his son Jesus and what Jesus did for us on this earth and the glory that he did and how Jesus came to earth to make my imperfect, dirty, sinful life something that is worthy of standing in front of God one day. And as they talk about that in 19 through 23, it goes on in verse 24 to say this. Let us think about ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect meeting together as some people did, but let us encourage one another, especially now that the end of the day of his return is drawing near. So I just want to make a few reflections on this verse as we close out this series today on how are we going to continue to gather. When there's so many currents and so many things fighting for our attention and so many things to drift us off path, how are we going to continue to gather on Sundays? How are we going to continue to gather at small groups? How are we going to continue to gather at youth events? How are we going to continue to gather? First thing is, it will take a team effort. It's going to take a team effort. It says, think of ways to motivate one another. Encourage one another. We have to understand that our gathering this each week, as we gather each week, we experience such great things throughout that gathering. It takes each one of us to do that, and we have to motivate one another. I mean, gathering each week isn't just about me getting up here and speaking on stage or Sophie getting up here and singing some songs, and it's not for that. It's so we can gather and we can encourage each other. Each person plays an important part in encouraging each other as we gather. Because those currents are out there, and they're designed to take you out, and they're designed to take you off path. But when we band together as a team, and we say, nuh-uh, I ain't letting those currents get to my friend. No, not my wife. No, not my kids. You're not going to take my kids. We're going to do this together. Not the guy that's sitting next to me or behind me. We're not going to let the currents take them off to the side, but we're all going to stay in the boat together. And we're going to go together. We're going to work together. We're going to paddle together. And we're going to stay away from the rocks and stay away from the limbs. We're a team. We're looking out for each other. We're looking for ways to encourage and motivate. Encourage and motivate. Cheer each other on. I love those words they use, encourage and motivate. When I was in high school, I played sports until right in my senior year, and I didn't do it all my senior year. Long story, my parents moved, I had to have a job, and didn't have time to do sports, but I still was a very avid sports fan and very loyal to my school. We went to every sporting event. My best friend and I, we would go to all of them, like the football events. We'd go to the 9th grade games, the JV games, the high school games. We'd travel when we could. And there's a couple of things that we did to support our team. So one of those things that we did is we decided it'd be really cool if we painted our faces every game that we went to. Which is kind of like, I've seen people do that, obviously, going to NFL games or college games, but I hadn't seen anybody at our high school do it. And as we've gone to games continuing on, I now notice that the high school kids actually paint their whole bodies, and they paint jerseys on. And fortunately, we didn't think about that because ain't nobody want to see my friend and I without our shirt on. We probably would have done it because, that's the kind of people we were. But it's kind of neat to see that continue on as they've taken that. So I'm not saying I started a trend, but at the same time, we were one of the first people at our school to do that. And the other thing that we did is we learned every cheer. We learned every one of the cheers that the cheerleaders did. And I've made fun of cheerleading throughout my life or whatever, but really I have to imagine it's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, thinking about how grumpy I am half the time, you have to be on whenever you're cheering. You've got to be ready and excited, and no matter what, you can have the worst day in the world, and you've got to get out there, and all of a sudden, you got to be ready, okay, be aggressive, be aggressive, and we learned all those and did it with them, and those cheerleaders get excited, and they're just, no matter what's happened in their day, they're just out there, be aggressive, be aggressive. And I think that's how we need to be as church, though. We have to encourage each other, right? We have to lead each other on. And that's what we should be doing at church each week. We should be going up to the person next to us and being like, hey, be aggressive. It's Sunday morning, right? So we've got to encourage each other. And we've got to bring each other along. And we've got to find ways to do that. So before church next Sunday, before we start the experience, that's what you get to do. Okay? You get to turn to your neighbor and you get to say, be aggressive. You guys aren't following along with me, are you? Anyway. But we have to be, I've done a lot of embarrassing things on this stage. That might rank in the top 5. Anyway, but we don't just come in here so we can have Sunday morning Jesus karaoke. We don't just come in here to get a little pep talk and a free coffee and go home. But we're here to encourage each other. We're here to bring each other along. We're here to get excited about being here, to be excited about being with one another, but also to get other people excited. And we have to do this as a team. It's a team effort. The next thing, if you're taking notes, is we have to learn how to stop the slide. We have to learn how to stop the slide. If we look at what it's saying here in Hebrews verse 25, it says, let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do. Or the NIV version actually says, don't give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. So a habit is essentially just a thinking that becomes a repetitive action. What is it that's allowing you to disconnect? What is it that it's allowing you to have that slide that's taking that thinking and making it a repetitive action? Because we're not going to be able to fight against the current if we can't figure out what our slide is and how to deal with our slide and how to deal with those things that prevent us from gathering and prevent us from coming to church. Because again, it doesn't happen on purpose. You just might think, I'm just going to miss this 1 week. And then before you know it, it's been 2. And then you come back once, and then you're not only coming every week, but you're coming once a month, and then maybe every couple of months. And those currents in life have just caught you up, and you've drifted into the rocks, and you've drifted to the side. And for some reason, we're not doing that as a team. We're not doing that together, and then you find yourself not gathering. You're missing small groups. But this habit is formed because this thinking happens. And then your action becomes that you're not attending. You're not attending groups. There's a few things that I've heard over the years that affect the slide of people and why excuse me, how they get caught into the slide. And if you're taking notes, you can jot these down. Really what I put that down in your notes for, though, was for you to think about this question yourself. And you to think, what's causing my slide? Or even to jot a few of these down so that you can be able to look at them whenever these things kind of start playing out in your own life. Because we don't really plan on it, but something comes up. Those currents come, those paths come, and we begin to just fall off track a little bit. So these are things that I either heard over the years often or had conversations with people about, like why they stopped gathering, why they would stop gathering together here at church. So the first thing I had, or the first reason that I've heard people say, is that gathering is inconvenient. The gathering's inconvenient. You know what I would say to that? It is. It's inconvenient. You got to get up in the morning. It's your day off work or school. You got to get together 2, 3, 5, 6 kids, whatever you got. You got to get them all dressed. Sometimes some of you women got to get your husbands dressed because they can't dress themselves. You got to get everybody here. That's not convenient. It's not convenient to do. Or I got to go to small group. I got to work all day. I got to go home. I got to get stuff together. We got to make dinner and take it over there because we're all bringing something. Got to figure all this out. Got to get all the kids picked up. So it's absolutely not convenient. But how many of you would also agree with me, the things that are the most valuable and the best things are also often very inconvenient? I mean, I remember a few years back, Danny and I got the opportunity to go watch OU versus OSU out of Bedlam in Stillwater. That was not convenient to go to do. And I promise you, in a town that's as big as Neosho, Missouri, when you put 10,000 cars in it, all leaving at the same time, that is not convenient to leave. It took us an hour and a half to drive 3 blocks. It's not convenient. It's frustrating. But the value that we got from that game, that experience, far outweighs that inconvenience. And the same as whenever we gather as a church. Yeah, it's inconvenient to get together. It's a lot more convenient to sit at home. But the value that you gain by gathering far outweighs the inconvenience that you have. The second thing I hear sometimes, or one of the other things I hear, is that the message is boring. Well, the first thing I'd say to that is, ouch. I'm sorry, I try, But really, what I really want to say is being fed at church is less about the meal that's being served and more about the hunger that you go in with. A couple months ago, I was really busy on a Saturday, and I'm running all around town. I was here in Neosho and running around. I had just thing after thing after thing after thing all day. And I was starving. It was probably, 1 o'clock. I hadn't eaten yet today. So I went over to Come and Go over there on Highway 60 and grabbed some pizza from Come and Go. Man, that was the best pizza. I thought I just flew to Italy and got pizza from Italy. I told my wife that later. I said, I don't know if Come and Go is the best pizza there is or if I am just absolutely starving every time I eat it. Because anytime I eat it, it's usually because I'm absolutely starving, and it is absolutely delicious. And the same goes for if I'm just snacking all day. If I'm just eating cookies and chips and cheese. Come on now, cheese. Cheese, I could eat cheese all day long. But I'll do that. I'll just snack and snack and snack, and then I can have the best dinner in front of me that somebody could possibly make, and it's just like, it's just okay. Because I've just filled myself up with junk all day. And if we do that as well, we just fill ourselves up with junk all week, and we don't come to church hungry. We don't come to church ready. We don't come to church ready to be fed. We just come to church expecting, I'm not going to get anything out of this week because we're talking about gathering, and I'm here every week, so what can I get? When we don't come with that hunger and we don't come ready, the message is going to be boring, and you're not going to get fed. But we got to come hungry. We got to come ready each week. We got to come with our spiritual knife and fork, ready to eat. Eat some of that Come and Go pizza. But anyway, the third thing is I don't like the worship. I've heard that quite a few times, is I don't like the worship. So, it's too loud, or it's kind of weird that people are raising their hands or clapping, or some guy was kind of dancing a little bit up there up front. I don't really know what's going on with that. I had the opportunity a few years ago. I was in a conversation with, it was myself and 2 other people. One of them was kind of saying this, I don't really like the worship. And this statement that was made by the other person, this gentleman, I always thought was the most fitting, beautiful statement that I ever heard about I don't like the worship. It was said in such a kind tone, in such a serious manner, but they just simply told the person, I'm so sorry that there was a misunderstanding, but we weren't worshiping you. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful. Because we're not here because I like the way that this person worships, or I like the way this person. We are here to worship God. We're here to worship Him. We're here to worship Jesus. We're here to worship what He's done. So if you want to clap, clap. If you want to sing, sing. If you want to raise your hand, raise your hands. But we're here to worship in our own way. So we don't need to judge what other people are doing with worship. We don't need to decide, well, they were a little weird in the way they worshiped, and so I'm not going to go there anymore. I'm not going to do that. But we encourage each other along and say, you know what? We're here to worship God. And you worship God how you want to worship Him, and I'll worship God how I want to worship Him. But I feel like God deserves every bit of worship that I have. That's my feeling. I mean, that's why I'm okay lifting my hands. It was kind of weird for me at one time. I grew up in a Baptist church. And as a matter of fact, little story, my mom one time when we very first went to the church raised her hand, and somebody comes and said, we don't do that here. So, but that's just the way that it was there, and that's fine. And so you come up in that environment. It is weird for some people, but I really believe, as excited as I get, I've told you guys this before, but if I got worship music playing in the car, I'm probably singing and my hands are probably raised, and people probably think I'm half crazy or on drugs or something. But we worship in our own way because we're worshiping for God. We're not worshiping for other people. And real quick, I have one more thing that I want to share with you is why people slide and why people stop gathering. They say, I've been hurt by people. And all I can say to this is, yep, you have. And people are going to hurt you. And I'm so sorry for that. I've been hurt so many times. I've been hurt so many times, and very often I've thought it's just such a better idea to not even bother to gather than to continue to get hurt. People are going to hurt you. But the hurt that people give you is so much less than the hurt that you're going to feel when you're alone. If you continue to disconnect yourself because somebody hurt you, or you continue to just isolate yourself, you're going to look up and you're going to be all alone. And that pain of being alone is so much bigger than the pain of somebody else hurting you. I'm truly sorry that when you gather, people are going to hurt you. And I'd love to just tell you that we're all just going to get along and everything's going to be great forever, but that's just not the truth. People are going to hurt you. But when you see the value in gathering, far outweighs that hurt that you have. Final point that I wanted to talk about today as we look about this scripture is we need to do it more as the day is approaching. I love that. They're saying here, we got to gather as a team. We got to do this together. There's currents that are going to drag us one way or drag us the other, drag us into the rocks, drag us into the trees. You can't do this alone. You can't raft alone. You can't live life alone. You'll end up in the wrong place. But we got to do this together. The slide is coming, and we got to realize that that's a real thing that's going to happen. And so as we look at that and we have that conversation about why I might slide and why you might slide, we got to do that together. What does doing that together look like? It's calling other people, encouraging them. Somebody doesn't show up, we call them and we say, hey man, I missed you this week. Where you been? We got to continue to do that more, gather more, be together more as the day is approaching. And what is that day that they're referring to? It's the day that Jesus comes back. It's the day of judgment. It's the day that every one of us will meet our Maker one day and look at Him face to face. And we will find out if we're going to heaven or go to hell. That is a day. There's a day that everybody will face that is like that. And as we continue to gather, as we continue to encourage each other, as we continue to bring each other on, we're going to be able to do that more and more, and be more and more excited about gathering together. When that day comes and we're doing that more often, we're going to be on that path that we need to be on. There's a lot of things in this world that aren't going to pass on to eternity in heaven. But one of those things that will pass on is gathering. We will continue to gather. We will gather here on earth, and we will gather together in heaven. If we look at Revelation 7:9, it says, I saw a vast crowd, too great to count, from every nation and every tribe, every people and language, standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb. We start seeing that day as really growing closer and closer. Put some things in perspective. we have to continue to gather. We will not give up gathering. We pray today as we close out. Jesus, I love you so much. First of all, Lord, I just want to thank you for Ignite. Thank you for this place that we can continue to gather and encourage and to grow each other and to help each other out and to cheer each other on. Thank you for a place that you have given us to be a part of a family that isn't just a normal family, that we know that we're something abnormal about us, but that's okay. Lord, I just pray that each person here, that you would just touch and just give that sense and that feeling of realizing that we need to never give up gathering. That we need to meet regularly. We need to do it more often as the day grows near. That we would continue to be a people that gather, that we gather at serve opportunities, that we gather at small groups, that we gather here on Sunday mornings for experience, that we gather at youth events, at men's events, at women's events, whatever it is. But we know that when we do life together, when we do life with each other, you're going to make life so much better. Things are greater, that your presence is greater when we are together, when we are gathered with other people. And Lord, I would just pray that you would be with each one of us as we have those opportunities of slide, as those things come into our life and our mind, those habits that come about that we might think about or have or start to put into place that keep us from gathering and keep us from coming together. Lord, I pray that you would help us be a team and work together and call each other out on that and just encourage us to continue to gather. And we will gather. We will not give up gathering. We will continue to do that for your glorious name, Jesus. I pray to you. Amen.